It was late evening on January 12, 1967, and three men were laboring over the body of psychology professor James Bedford, who had just died from kidney cancer at the age of 72. Bedford became the world's first cryopreserved human being and now lies suspended in liquid nitrogen in a vault in Scottsdale, Arizona. Although the 72-year-old said before his death that he didn't expect ever to be revived, scientist Robert Nelson, one of the trio who carried out the preservation process, says he is confident that Bedford will one day live again. When we froze Bedford, man had never been on the moon, there had never been a heart transplant, there was no GPS, no cell phones, said Nelson, now 80 years old. Now Nelson's extraordinary story is set to be turned into a film starring Paul Rudd, and will follow his life from his early years as the stepson of a Boston gangster to his role in Bedford's preservation. But the movie, a comedy, will also have its darker moments, not least the 1979 court case that saw him sued for $400,000 by some of the families of those he treated after he ran out of money to service his California cryogenic vault and left their bodies to decompose. Unlike contemporary patients, who are slowly cooled over 3 days before being stored in a capsule filled with liquid nitrogen, Bedford's journey began with an ice bath followed by being stuffed into a styrofoam box and temporarily stored in an LA garage. Along with Nelson, a retired electrician who never finished high school, Italian biologist Dr. Dante Brunel and chemist Robert Prehata, of Santa Barbara, California, began work on the psychologist moments after he was pronounced dead. Having cooled Bedford with ice, removed and replaced his blood with the biological antifreeze dimethyl sulfoxide, and packed him into a box, the trio realized they had nowhere to put him because his cryonic capsule was still being built in Arizona. As a result, Bedford spent his first 2 weeks in suspended animation stashed in a Topanga Canyon garage belonging to two pothead friends of Nelson's and arrived there by pickup truck. We did what we had to do, we kept him there for about 2 weeks, then we put him back in my truck, took him to Balboa Park in Los Angeles and a mortician put him in a hearse, took him to Arizona and put him in a capsule. Originally from Boston, it wasn't until a year after his 1965 move to Los Angeles, that Nelson first encountered cryonics. Nelson's introduction to the science came via a copy of Dr. Robert Ettinger's seminal 1962 tome, The Prospect of Immortality. He proposed the possibility that suspended animation is a science but while not yet discovered, potentially doable, explained Nelson. I liked the idea so I went and got his book and it just blew me away. Ettinger, who was born in Atlantic City, New Jersey, is considered the father of cryogenics and posited the idea that death is a gradual process and one that can be reversed, provided the body is frozen quickly enough. The physics professor, who died in 2011 aged 92 in Detroit, Michigan, and is cryopreserved himself, was responsible for introducing Nelson to Bedford, who had begun corresponding with him after reading his book. Bedford was writing to Dr. Ettinger about his book and he had cancer, says Nelson. He was considering suspension but no one had been suspended. He didn't want to be the first but he was close to dying so he made arrangements he could afford it because he was a very wealthy man. Nelson says he was initially reluctant to go ahead but agreed after Ettinger convinced him Bedford's preservation would help further the cause of cryogenics. Bedford said at the time, "Are you the man who's going to carry out the procedure?" So I said yes. He said, "Mr. Nelson, I want you to know something. I don't have any hope that I will ever be revived, but I do this in the hope that this incredible science will benefit my children and my grandchildren someday.